Welcome to the conversation. It's hard to be Catholic, and I would say it's even harder to be a young Catholic. We're more harshly criticized than any other group right now. That's probably not true, but it feels like that a lot of the times, and so much of our lives has changed from our parents' lives or our grandparents' lives, and we weren't necessarily given a roadmap on how to get from point A to point B. And it feels like we're making life-altering decisions on the fly, hoping and praying for the best. I feel like the exodus the church has seen of young adults has put a lot of pressure on us, those of us that are still around, to be perfect and somehow represent everybody that is left. As I look around at the young adults that surround me, I'm not comforted by what I see. With that in mind, I ask myself, why am I still Catholic? And for those of you still telling other people that you're Catholic, why? And how? How can you be Catholic after negative interactions with other Catholics? Do you really want to be associated and compared with them? How can you still be Catholic when it would be so much easier to leave all the rules, the negativity, the intolerance, leave all that behind and do your own thing? Today, I'm asking the people closest to me to shed light on why they're Catholic in the hopes that you might hear something that resonates with you. Something that could reassure you to continue to call yourself Catholic, knowing that you're in the right place. Joining me in the studio today is DANIELLE VILLEGAS. DANIELLE, tell us a little about yourself.
I am a single woman, 35 years old. I was born and raised in Orange County. I spent some of my adult life in Hawaii. I went to college there and started my career there. And I lived in Washington, D.C. at one point, back in Orange County now, getting my master's in leadership studies at Vanguard University in Costa Mesa.
Okay. What's your thesis?
My thesis actually is on the spiritual disciplines of silence, solitude, and prayer in light of St. John of the Cross's 4 major writings, and his most popular writing, which I focus on the most, The Dark Night of the Soul.
So, sounds like that will greatly influence your answer to my question, why are you Catholic? Sounds like maybe you would have spent a lot of time reflecting or in silence thinking about, is this the right path for me, maybe?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when I picked my thesis topic, it was about 3 years ago when I originally started it. And a quick aside, my school actually is a Protestant school. It's not Catholic.
Was it challenging ever? I mean, do people get in discussions about...
All the time. Yes.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it was
challenging. Like, oh, this thing that you believe is totally wrong.
Yeah. So
really?
Yeah. So our professors, they're obviously very well educated. They have PhDs. Sure. They're Protestant pastors, though. Okay. And so what's fascinating is that my 2 favorite ones, their spiritual directors are Catholic nuns.
Whoa.
Which is wild, right?
Yeah. Who's teaching who here?
Yeah, that's right.
You're
and
right.
So here we are in this class. I'm the only Catholic. They're teaching all these Catholic teachings. Mm-hmm. So at any rate, when we entered into the last part of our program, we got to decide our topic, and we could do it on leadership theory or any of the spiritual component. Part of it.
Sure.
And the spiritual components, how the Dark Night fits in silence, solitude, and prayer, that's not obviously leadership theory, even in studying the way that it looked with Jesus as an apostles. Mm-hmm. Leadership studies, regardless of what university you go to, has a character development part of it.
I see.
So we took the character development part from a spirituality perspective. I probably for years up to that point was very fascinated with John of the Cross, but also very timid and scared to approach the Dark Night of the Soul. And, people had told me, be very
careful. Don't go there.
Really, don't go there, especially without a spiritual director, because it can be such a dark subject matter.
Sure.
And
hard to get out.
Really, and it is, and I still wrestle within my own soul about a lot of stuff pertaining to that. But I do think it's a message that needs to be renewed in our time for the world, especially as Catholics, because I've been told this over and over again by so many people, and I believe it with all my heart, but the Catholic faith is a very mature faith. Mm-hmm. And it certainly goes beyond feelings and whims and so on and so forth. And so
That doesn't mean that every person in the faith is mature.
No, I'm not
by
saying that
any
at all.
means.
Yeah, but like definitely the core kind of message that's been passed down over time, like John of the Cross. Now, this is in the 1600s. So again, essentially, the easiest way to put it, it addresses human suffering in that it talks about how God, in his permissive will, obviously his perfect will was that there wouldn't be death or wouldn't be suffering in the world. But in his permissive will has allowed humans to be humans. And because of that, there's suffering in the world. Original sin resulted, obviously, from Adam and Eve, and the aftermath of that is suffering. I mean, amongst other things.
Sure.
But there's joy too. But in our lives, and the way John of the Cross addresses it, his understanding and what he firmly believes and what he lived his life preaching was that suffering is a conduit to complete union with God if we allow it to be. That doesn't mean people don't have union with God. It just means that there's, I think, levels of that union.
Really?
And, yeah.
That's an interesting thought. You probably don't have to worry, though, then if you might not get it. Or if you're not mature enough, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
I don't know if mature enough is the right
I think
word,
I think that's
really?
absolutely accurate.
Okay.
I think mature enough, but also too, what is holiness? You know, I think for me in my journey and in studying John of the Cross, and who comes to mind when we talk about this a lot is Therese. I love Saint Therese of Lisieux.
And you're just in Avila, right?
I was just in Avila. Yes, it was kind of like a way for me to kind of immerse myself in my studies of John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila a little more, to walk in their footsteps and just be there and pray. And it was truly incredible. And it made sense of a lot of their writings, to be honest with you.
Oh, okay.
And they have something called the Center of Mysticism in Avila, meant for people that come to visit to understand mysticism better, because it's a hard subject to understand. It.
So something like mysticism, maybe not something that a common person or just any person would be talking about, or even, but that sounds like something that might have led you to, or continues to draw you into answering that question of why you're Catholic. That
Yes, 100%. And I
Okay.
get so excited when you say that. I can just, my face lights up. But yeah, so my apostolate, I think what God has called me to do on this earth is to bring hope to those suffering. And again, it's not an accident that, I mean, what are the odds I go to this Protestant school and get to write on this subject? You know, the dark night of the soul that I had been intrigued by for so long. When I read the Dark Night of the Soul specifically, I mean, I can remember where I was. I was kneeling while I was reading part of the book because I felt like it made so much sense of my life. Like these things that I deeply knew about suffering, like I just experienced, that John of the Cross was pouring them out into my soul through his words.
Sure.
It was just the most powerful experience for me. I'd like to add to that, if I may. When I first, going back to what we first talked about, when I first picked this subject, this was about 3 or 4 years ago. And when I was in Avila, I was very humbled. First reading it, while there was joy in it and that I can relate it to my life when I was younger, it was obviously hard too. I mean, it opened my eyes to a lot of things. And at that time in my life, the Lord was calling me to kind of go deeper in my healing journey from a lot of past things that I had been ignoring. So it was the first time in my life where I was kind of not only being humbled in a way that was almost feeling out of control, because these emotions were coming up, they were manifesting themselves in physical ways, so I had to deal with them emotionally. And so facing that for the first time was a cross of its own. And so it brought these readings to life. But then about 1.5 years ago, I lost my dad. And it's just been a really tough 1.5 years. Wow, it's the level of suffering I've had this 1.5 years. I didn't even know it existed, that the human heart can feel that deep of pain. I praise God in his providence that I had already read the writings. When my dad passed, I had a lot of matters to take care of, so I had to put my thesis aside. Yet, even though I had to put it aside, this year has been teaching me more about what John of the Cross talks about than anything I read in that first year of trying to research it. So I mention Avila again because whenever I was there, I couldn't believe that 4 years ago in picking this subject, that God knew my dad would pass and the pain that would cause me. And it was through, a gift he left me that I was able to afford and have the opportunity to go to Avila and that it was because his passing I was there, even though I already picked this subject matter before he was very sick. And in Avila, I just thought, Lord, your hand is so on me. This is a consolation and a gift that I can be so in union with John of the Cross and Trace of Avila in this holy place. You knew this would happen and that my dad would essentially almost have to pass in order for it to happen. And so the level of suffering I've experienced this year and a half through it has certainly made my thesis have such deeper meaning.
Really what you're getting to is that healing, right? You're being led by Christ to healing in a place where you can become that person that you were, or a better person, right? A better version of yourself, or somebody that's not always constantly in pain.
I think that, and I'll use his analogy, it's very simple, but it's so relatable, and it's just the most beautiful way to, I think, explain that dark night. He talks about a log. And, you know, if you were to go to the grocery store, let's just say actually out in the woods, you cut
I didn't know what kind of log you meant.
Grocery store, no. But
so he talks about
out in the woods. Okay, so you have a log and you're getting your log ready for the fire. Well, whenever you get pure wood outside, there's maggots and insects inside of it. Obviously, it's in nature, and moss, exactly. So that's us, right? The wood. We have all this stuff inside of us. And so when you originally put the wood into the fire, all of a sudden you don't see it at first, right? Because you're just looking at the wood. But when it goes in the fire, the insects and moss are kind of fleeing for their life. And so they're flying everywhere, and it's ugly and it's scary. And that's the dark night. But essentially what happens is the log and the fire become one, and you can't tell where one ends and the other one begins.
And then you're set on fire and you die.
Well, hopefully you're set on fire for God and you're bringing life to the world. But
Ooh, okay, that's good. The campers are warmed by your...
There you go.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
That's right. Like if we didn't have that need for continual healing, we would just be complacent, you know? So I feel like St. Paul says that thorn in his side is there so that we're constantly relying on God, and so that others also know that anything good in us is of the Lord, because we're weak human beings.
Well, Danielle, thank you. I appreciate you being here and sharing with us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Up next, we're going to hear from an engineer who works at JPL. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the conversation. With me over the phone right now is JOAN. JOAN, tell me about yourself.
Well, Ian, I am a systems engineer, and I work at the Jet Propulsion Lab, or JPL, in Pasadena.
Fantastic. Do you enjoy that job? I would assume that being an engineer, you have to enjoy that. You have to love that job, don't you?
Well, with any job, you love and hate certain parts of it. But,
okay. True.
Yeah, in general, I do. I'm really passionate about space and really... I guess flying, but specifically to space. And so getting the opportunity to work on hardware and experiments that go there is pretty exciting and keeps me motivated even through the dry spots of work, I would say.
Working at JPL, do they entice you with like promises of going to space? Like, 15 years is this package, 20 years you get to go in space?
No, though that would be great.
Bummer.
Yeah. They entice you with the fact that you get to design stuff and build stuff that goes into space. So that's still pretty cool. Okay.
Does your name get to go? Like, do you get to put like made by JOAN or something?
Well, technically, no.
Okay.
But there are ways we all try to get our name on the hardware.
Really? Like what?
Well, we're not really.
Ooh, okay. Don't tell.
Depending on what your job is, maybe you can write your name in a place and nobody sees it or something like that.
That's awesome. Can you tell me just yes or no? Are you in space?
Not yet.
Oh, all right. Okay. Well, you can let us know when you do get up there.
I hope one day the answer will be yes.
Yes, that's fantastic. Okay, so you know what the question is, JOAN. Why are you Catholic?
Man, this is a loaded question. So.
I thought it was a pretty easy one.
Then I would love to hear your answer sometime. But no, for me, I'm going to have to break that down like how I do at work, break down huge questions into smaller questions or problems. I guess first I would ask myself, why do I believe in God? And then I can decide why I'm Catholic specifically. And, for me, I guess it's related. I was raised Catholic, so I was raised believing there was a God. as I've gotten older and learned more things, I've questioned that, not wanting to believe it just because. Honestly, even though I'm kind of entrenched in the science and engineering field, I personally have not found evidence that contradicts the existence of God.
Where other of your colleagues might have found that? Is that what you mean?
I would say they haven't found evidence to prove that it is true.
I see.
Which I think scientifically, at least, is also potentially true, but at least there's not a argument against it. So it's more through, I would say, my own experiences, and actually science itself is, for me, is a justification just through the amount of complexity and beauty and connection and logic in everything. Mm-hmm. For me, is more of a justification for it. As far as why I'm a Catholic, I actually find that the richness of our faith is what continues to push me through all the doubt that I have.
You doubt? How could you have any doubt?
Oh, man. I feel like if you don't have doubt, then something's wrong. But maybe I just tell myself that to make myself feel better. But no, I think it's healthy to continually question everything that we believe and why we believe it, whether it's about your faith or some other topic area. So I question all the time. And sometimes I really waver on coming to some particular conclusion. And so it's helpful to have a community of people, a huge amount of work and understanding that has been grappling with these same questions for, a couple thousand years.
Sure. I think that's really great what you're talking. I mean, from what I'm hearing is you can challenge your faith. It hits back with other answers, right? Or more questions maybe, or it doesn't just take your doubt and fold.
Yeah, I would say typically I come up with more questions. There tends to be a greater mystery, which in some level, I guess, is sort of the definition of faith. If it weren't a mystery, then it wouldn't be faith anymore. Yeah. Well, I guess for me, coming to the realization that our individual experiences of our faith and God in our lives is different, right? Where it's never going to be the same between two people. But there seems to be a common theme that I find when I am able to talk about the things I struggle with the people around me. And it makes me feel, I guess, less alone in those doubts and those struggles and those times where it feels like you're alone. In the end, I find that community largely is the proof of the existence of God, because I experience God through those people, because they allow me to not be perfect and to just struggle in general.
It's interesting that you say that, because I would assume, working with people that might not have the same beliefs as you, especially coming from like a STEM, background, I would assume that being surrounded by people at work that don't share your same belief, you might be swayed. But you're saying that's not the case. You don't have that?
Well, to be honest, the community of people who support me would not be my coworkers primarily. Okay. At work, we don't discuss God or faith frequently. I was thinking about this earlier. It's something I actually almost probably purposefully don't talk about.
Really?
To a certain point in time.
Sure.
Almost like I have to prove to them that technical skills are valid, mm-hmm. and that I'm a rational person.
Right.
And once I get to that point and I know people a little better, then I'm more willing to reveal that part of my life, because I already have good standing with them. Not only because I want them to consider maybe what I believe in for themselves, not that I would necessarily in words say that, but also because whether this is good or bad, I guess it's how I feel. I feel like if I share that too early and there's somebody who completely disagrees with me, they also might start to question my technical abilities as an engineer. Right. I don't know if that's true, but it's just sort of a fear that I have.
Oh, no, I totally can identify with that. I mean, I don't work in the sciences, but I understand when you're talking to somebody who doesn't share the same beliefs, or they might not share the same beliefs, that you just don't know. They might take everything that you say and twist it or in spite of the thing that you believe, because they had a negative experience, they don't believe the same thing and try to hurt you with it, or I don't know, that's probably not the right word, but I totally understand.
Mm-hmm. But once I get to that point, it's not like I'm going to hide what I'm on the weekend or something like that. If it's, a church function or a retreat or something like that, I've almost found, even outside of work in my own personal life, people who maybe don't have the same beliefs that I do, right? If they get to know me as a person and then observe my faith, it's more likely to be convincing to them because they know me as a person versus me just going up and trying to talk to them or convince them.
Do you think that's okay that you are selective about the time that you reveal that part of your life? Because I think a lot of people would say, well, Christ saved you. You should have nothing to fear. You have no reason to hide any part of your relationship with Christ or your belief. Is it okay that you are selective?
I would say yes, because it's not that I deny it, right? If somebody were to ask me, I would never lie. That's, I think, a totally different situation. Though one might argue if you're not revealing the full truth, then you are lying.
Right.
Like that. But I guess I look at it as, how can I make the most impact? And
interesting.
In my opinion, not in all cases, right?
Okay,
I mean,
sure, of course.
Situation dependent. You really do have to think about how can I gain the trust of this person and therefore have larger influence on them potentially versus just trying it prematurely.
I think that's the right attitude to have about that. It sounds, like you're being smart about it and you're not maybe shoving it in people's faces. Like you said, how can you have the most influence? And I mean, for you, it would directly affect your job if somebody had some bias against you and they thought you couldn't perform some task because of your personal beliefs. Mm-hmm. So, I think that's thank you for that enlightenment. That's that question answered from now on. I don't ever have to ask that question again.
Well, I think you should keep asking it, right?
Yeah. And, maybe other people have other opinions. And so I'd love to know, I'd love to hear those. So maybe that's a different show. Okay, Joan, these are beautiful responses. I think my thought was that for somebody who works in your field where logic and proof are the dominating factors, that you would have a hard time. You would be challenged daily by either people or maybe evidence against the case for God. It doesn't sound like that at all. It doesn't sound like you're being challenged in that way. If anything, those things are pointing you, driving you towards God. I think that's really beautiful. That challenge can bring you closer to God, which is obvious, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's beautiful to hear it from your experience. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is pretty neat. I think that it also depends on sort of your interpretation of things. If you're a person who, for example, believes every word in the Bible literally, then there are issues.
Sure.
But if it is more of a representation of certain things, then it does make sense. And interestingly enough, the field that I work in, the more answers we try to find, it seems as though the more we realize how little we know. And
that's so true.
I think that the fact that happens over and over and over again can open people's minds to realizing that maybe they don't know that there is not a God or something.
Well, Joan, thank you very much. Just to conclude, totally off topic, do you have some music that you can recommend to me? Something that you've been listening to lately? I should have asked you before, but...
Like a particular...
It could be album, song, artist.
I like a lot of classical music, so not sure you're into that, but if you are, I would recommend, funnily enough, Jupiter by Holst. The name of the portion is called Jupiter. It's the planet Jupiter, basically. And it's by the composer Holst, so Holst.
Okay.
It's great. He actually has pieces for every one of the planets, but Jupiter's my favorite.
Oh, fantastic. I'll definitely check that out. Thank you for that recommendation.
Yeah.
And thank you again for being on the show.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. All right. See you later. Welcome back to the conversation. With me right now on the phone is JT Tanner.
What's up?
Hey, JT, tell me about yourself. Who are you?
So, in addition to being one of your friends, I'm studying to be a priest in the religious order of the Society of Jesus, also known as the Jesuits. And I'm from Southern California, and currently I am up in San Jose, California. Yeah, that's the basic of who I am, I guess.
Okay, I like that. What are you doing up there? Studying hard?
So I'm kind of taking a break before getting back into theological studies. So I've been a Jesuit for about 9 years now, 9.5 years, and I'm in the final stages of my formation before getting ordained a priest.
Okay, so you know the question. So why are you Catholic? I know you're a priest or going to be a priest, in a couple years. It should be an easy one for you. Here's a little softball. Why are you Catholic? And how are you Catholic?
Okay, so...
Sounds like it's an easy answer.
Well, I think the question is accompanied by the reason you asked that question, I'm thinking, is because there's so many options out there, right? Of like what you could be. You could be all different types of Christian, and in addition to being Buddhist or Muslim or Jewish or whatever.
Yeah.
But then also being agnostic or atheist and like everything in between, like spiritual, not religious. So the question of like why I'm Catholic it's kind of a loaded question because it really means like why am I not these other things?
Okay, you got to the root of that. Is exactly what I was trying to get to.
Okay, good. So the decision to be Catholic. So I was born Catholic, but kind of stopped going to church. But then when I got into high school, I had certain experiences that led me back to church. And then the decision to remain Catholic has been a lifelong process, and then the decision to become a Jesuit and leading up to priesthood has been something that I've had to deepen over time. So it's not just something that you make the decision. For me, being Catholic is not just something that you make the decision once and then you just kind of stick to it. It's something that is ongoing. It's a constant interaction with the current reality. And with the current church. So I did not join the Catholic Church 20 years ago, and then continue to participate in the church that I joined 20 years ago. I'm like interacting with the current church now. For me, I'm Catholic because of our rich history and because of Jesus. I think that's what. There's so many different things I could say, but I think it really comes down to Jesus. Yeah, you want to ask something in response to that?
No, that's fine. I mean, obviously, especially now, that's the focus is like, oh, my relationship with Jesus, and forget the church and organized religion. It's just about me and Jesus. I don't need forgiveness because I can just go straight to Christ and He'll forgive me.
Yeah.
So when you say it's Jesus, what about Jesus is the thing that's bringing you back? Because Jesus is in tons of places, right? He's in warehouses throughout, you know what I mean? Like, he's not in this church necessarily. He's not limited to this church. So why this one?
So Jesus, you go back to and this is a phrase that I think some Christians or Catholics might be afraid of, but the historical Jesus, and you go back to who the historical Jesus is, that we get kind of pictures of from the Gospels, but we don't really have an exact clue of who exactly the historical Jesus was. But we know that he had a unique relationship with God, and that he preached the coming of the kingdom, or the revealing of the kingdom. It depends on the gospel you're reading. Mm-hmm. So this guy, who we believe was the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God, in addition to a lot of different other things. I'll say when you look at Jesus' life, he stood with the poor, he stood with the marginalized, and he stood with the victim. And when I say, because he was the victim himself, but when I use that word, I'm talking about a group of people within a social structure that suffer at the hands of that social structure because of how it's formed.
Right. And
Jesus was the person who stood with those people and who ended up suffering with them and ended up being a victim of that same social structure. In that case, it was the Roman Empire and in a very strict form of Judaism. So there's something about this that the church, with all its faults, has been able to maintain an imitation of Jesus' life, that part of Jesus' life, in a very tangible way. The church has been able to imitate that throughout history. With all of its faults, with all of its problems, it's been able to inspire people to do the exact same thing that Jesus did in a very real, tangible, and affective way. And when you look at history, you can see this. It's obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I say I'm Catholic because of Jesus, that's what I mean. It's not just like this personal relationship with Jesus, and I wake up and I go get coffee, and Jesus, and I talk to Jesus, and he makes me feel good about, like, he affirms my being of who I am.
Right.
If that's what you need, that's cool. But what I'm talking about is something way more, you might say radical, right?
Right.
Even though that word is overused.
Sure.
But it's something that is really it's an active agent in society and in the world today. And that's why I'm Catholic, because I see it happening in a very real way in the lives of many different people. I think that's what I would bring down being Catholic too. Well, why I'm Catholic.
JT, I don't know why I thought that I was going to outsmart you or somehow trip you up, because you bested me right away. You got me.
Oh, yeah?
Well, yeah, because I wanted to kind of know, I kind of wanted to goad the people that I had on the show into, getting into an argument with me, right? I wanted somebody to, defend their position. It doesn't matter that nobody else does it the way I do. But you brought it right down to Jesus' level, or right up to Jesus' level, whatever you want to say. I mean, I can't argue with that. I mean, that's exactly why we should all be Catholic. Like you said, this man's life has over and over continually proven to be the thing that brings us all back. Whatever the reason is that we say that we're Catholic or Christian or whatever the thing is we are, that's the reason that we do it, though, ultimately, is because, I don't know if would you call it a desire to be aligned to help the marginalized, or does it go deeper than desire? Do you need to be that same support?
I think it's a belief, and when I've really thought about this, Ian, is so there's so much in the world that's, and you just think about the results of our current election, and which I don't have to get into, but you just think about what the belief was that initiated or brought that to fruition, Trump getting elected.
Yes.
Somewhere behind that is this desire, or no, this belief that the world is controlled by power and strength, and you have to conform to that. And there's so much I would say biologically that proves that the strongest survive, the fittest of the
survival of the fittest.
Survival of the fittest. Sorry.
Yes. You're fine.
And there's so much about the material world that points to that, and there's so much about how we interact as humans that points to, if you want to get ahead in this world, it's a dog eat dog world, and you have to do certain things to get ahead. And the life of Jesus is the exact opposite. And so I think as Catholics, when we believe this, we're really making, the word would be existential. We're making an existential statement about what reality is. So we're saying that at the heart of reality is not a power struggle, but at the heart of reality is a giving up of power and a surrender to not just this hippie love, but a compassion, an understanding, a real seeking, a search for understanding the other person, putting yourself in their shoes and loving them from within themselves. So I don't think most Catholics might not express it that way, but that's really what we're saying, is that the heart of reality is not this search for power and domination. It's the antithesis of the imperium, of these dominating, these social structures of domination. It's the exact opposite. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Love another as you love yourself. Mm-hmm. It's very radical, and I think any Catholic would agree with this and nod their heads with what I'm saying. It's not necessarily what I'm saying, but which the Church has said for centuries. Sure. But the implications of this are very antithetical to everything that the world is saying and how we act sometimes, because we can be real jerks.
Right. Okay, so I go out into the world and I look out and I see the exact opposite of what I hear on Sunday or what I know to be true.
Yeah.
How do I move forward knowing that you know what's right and you see that the people around you maybe are struggling with it still?
Yeah, and this is where the personal relationship with Jesus does have an effect, that it isn't just a corny Sunday discourse, because when that reality has taken its course within yourself, you can have faith that it will start to affect the people around you. That doesn't always look pretty. You might have to. What I think like popular Christianity has done to our faith, and not just to Catholics, is I think that like being Catholic, being Christian, is about being nice. Mm-hmm. And it's about like saying like really pretty things and like talking about your love of Jesus. And like sometimes that might be really good, but other times it comes down to things that Jesus did in the Gospels, which was challenging systems of oppression and challenging systems that marginalize people and systems that need victims in order to progress. These are bad social structures. So like what I'm talking about is it makes a big demand on the believer, because you have to sometimes say and do unpopular things instead of just like putting, real men love Jesus bumper sticker on the back of your truck,
Right. Not of this world.
Yeah. Out of this world. Yeah.
No, not of this world. Those.
Yeah. And it's funny, Ian, I used to have one of those stickers on the back of my truck.
I know you did.
I think that the Christianity has been reduced to that. Is like, as long as you're kind of nice to people, publicly claim that you're a Christian in a nominal way, you're doing your part. And I think what the gospel calls for, which is an imitation of Jesus' life, but not just like an imitation of it, but like a real living it out in the present historical moment, is a much more radical thing, and sometimes requires outrage to a certain degree. Not violence, not like an aggression that affects people in a physical way, but like a sort of kind of disgust at certain things. I don't know.
No, I totally understand what you're saying. Like a passion, something that drives you forward in the direction that you know to be true. Yeah. JT, thank you. You bested me.
I don't know if I did, man.
I think you did. I'm very humbled. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening. Speaking with these people, the thing that struck me was the vastness of their belief. Though they related to the faith in different ways and had differing reasons for claiming the Catholic faith, what comes to mind is that we're so blessed to have these different opinions, because we can share in one another's experiences. And through the struggle and scrutiny that we face as young adults, it reminded me I'm not alone, even though it might seem like it. And not only am I not alone, but other people are doing this better than me. And maybe better isn't the right word, but they're giving me a goal to try to attain, a life outside of the one that I know, something that I can long for that's more than the thing that I have, this life that I have. I'm excited to say that I'm Catholic, even though the reasons for why we might say that we're Catholic are different. The reasons might be different, but I can rest easy knowing that there's a community to support me in my hour of need. This show has been brought to you by Orange County Catholic Radio. My hope with this show is that the conversation doesn't stop here, that in listening to this show, you've heard something that continues the conversation in your own life.